There's a Pasolini film called The Gospel according to St. Matthew, the Gospel, as written in the Bible. It's a beautiful, beautiful movie. And when I shot that and I took a look at the picture, it was extraordinary because in the middle of the picture, there was the undeniable face of Jesus Christ, as you would imagine. But the film is just a normal film. It's about Jesus, but there isn't enough Jesus to make up this very strong Jesus character. So how has this happened? It's kind of really bizarre. And so I went back and I watched the movie, and then I realized how it's happened. Because Pasolini, every time he shoots any character, whether it's a child, it's a woman, or it's Jesus, he frames them in exactly the same way in the camera. Dead center, cropped like this. So every character shot is shot like this. And then you cut to an outside shot. But so essentially the kind of amalgamation of all of these kind of heads ended up looking like that kind of Tourin Shroud, you know, the kind of generic human in a way, which oddly, and very Jesus-y. That was very surprising. So as a child, I used to love the projectors, you know, the light on the wall, the ratcheting of the sound, or the celluloid, the fact that you could kind of see every frame. This was enchanting to me. And you put it in a machine and it works like a sewing machine. It starts and stops and it creates this, a persistence of vision. That's frame stops in the gate very quickly, a shutter comes down, it moves long, stops. That's how they work, but really, really fast. Anyway, all that, it was kind of magical and beautiful. So I've always been in with film. And I suppose the Photographs of Films project came about, well, it came about because I had a camera and I had a laptop. And I was curious, in films they're often kind of tracking shots. And I wanted to see what would happen if I kind of froze the frame on a tracking shot as the camera would then shoot another frame. And then what would you get if you stuck them all together? You'd get the scene as a long kind of line of tape. So I was focusing on Hitchcock, and because he does a lot of slow tracking shots or slow pans, and they all work. And so you can tape them all together. Anyway, this was just an interesting exercise to see whether you could capture the whole scene in some way. You would get a sense of the narrative, or what you'd get, I didn't really know. So that was just a fun aside in a way. This was 2014, and I had this camera, and at the same time the Sochi Winter Olympics were on. And I thought, oh, well, I think the skater, there's the pairs skater or skating events coming on. I wonder what, if I set up the camera, and you know it's going to be 5 minutes or so, if I kind of run it as a long exposure, open the aperture for 5 minutes, whatever the duration of the event is, and see what kind of smear that will give me. But, you know, is there anything? What do you get? You know, you get the idents, the logos, they're fixed because they don't change, and then you get a kind of smear. And it was kind of a kind of pretty image. And I thought, oh, well, you know, maybe I'll try this with the skiing, try this, you know, with the ice hockey. And so I started kind of working out the exposures and running a few, you know, bobsleigh event and things like that. And they were kind of, you know, interesting. Don't know what they mean, don't know what they are, but they're rather beautiful. And then it was really a very short kind of step to going, wonder what a whole movie would look like. That'd be interesting, see what Psycho looks like, you know, all the light from Psycho sucked into one frame. I mean, what would you get? I'm sure it's just going to be a grey nothing. So then I decided to step up and not use a laptop anymore, because I thought this was probably now worth a kind of more serious inquiry. I was kind of hopeful that there might be something, but didn't really know. So I got my friend Ben lent me a giant Nikon. I got a very large kind of 6K monitor, And me and Ben spent a day with polarized filters, ND filters, working out how much you had to stop down the light to kind of expose something for an hour and a half. First of all, you drop the light on the monitor, then you drop the light coming into the camera with an ND filter, and you've got to get, the first attempts we had, of course, you just end up with a white nothing. Second was just pitch black. Somewhere in the middle there's going to be a sweet spot where the exposure's right. I think the first film I photographed was The Wizard of Oz that I got right. It was great. All this kind of technicolor wonder. There wasn't much figurativeness there, but something about all the colors and some kind of essence of the film, some quintessence of the film. It was all gathered there. And it was like a miracle, because I had expected it to be charmless, kind of blurred, like when you mix clay, coloured balls of clay together. It would be too overwhelming to leave any possible picture. Everything would be moving too fast, but wasn't the case. So here was this lovely kind of colour-filled picture that was vaguely resonant of the film itself. And that was the starting point. It was an interesting translation of the film. So having got the first very successful from my perspective, my next thought was, well, I wonder how many other thousands and thousands of people have done this before me. I can't possibly be the first person, in the history of photography, essentially to point a camera at a television set and see what it gives you. So then, let's see what the other people have done. So kind of went online and went, long exposure photographs of films, nothing. Films photographed in one long exposure, art, nothing. Long exposure photography of whole movies, nothing. And so I kept looking and looking and looking, because to me it seemed inconceivable that, in a way, such a kind of incredibly obvious idea. And photography has just been around for so long. The idea that nobody decided to photograph in the television set in the 1950s, so where are all the people that should have done this? And to my astonishment, there weren't any. There are a couple of people in recent years that have done some digital sandwiching, where they had taken a frame every 30 seconds of a film and then use some software to kind of layer it on top of each other. There are 24 frames in a second. I'm getting all this light when I photograph the whole movie. Some people, and I didn't find them till much later on, had taken a frame every 30 seconds of a film and then used some software to squash them all together. And they end up with a vaguely similar-ish thing to my thing, but it doesn't use photography at all. So it doesn't have the whole movie. It has just a fraction of the movie. With Bergman, he has, I think it's the top left hand is always slightly lighter in all his films, so it's very peculiar. Stanley Kubrick, that's behind me, is 2001, has a great sense of, you notice this when you're watching the film, so it doesn't necessarily take me to point this out, but you get a strong sense of his symmetry that he has that runs all the way. These are just an interesting translation of movies, a nice way, everything I think to fall kind of gathered together in one place and kind of delightful for that. If you take one of my pictures, like the picture behind me, and you run the movie at the same time, but you have this overlaid, and then you stop the movie and you crossfade back from my picture to whatever frame you've got in the movie, you can find that shot, that scene in this photograph. And so it's kind of delightful. So in a way, this could be deciphered by, a higher intelligence than ours, back in some way into the movie, because everything is there. And I like that, just as a kind of concept. So I started the project, started with 2001, then realized that it didn't, as far as I could tell, no one else seemed to have done this thing, which to me seemed rather surprising, but oddly true. So then I thought, okay, let's go to work. Let's start shooting movies. Let's kind of pick my favorite films and let's start doing loads this way and see what I get. And what I instantly discovered was that nearly all films, no matter whether they're made by, auteur directors or Z movie directors, they pretty much all look the same using my process. They have a kind of hot spot in the middle, and then a kind of charmless, smudgy blur that fades off to the edges. And they all look the same. They nearly all look the same. So, I shot about 15 more films, and I was thinking, well, that's crap, and that just looks like that, and that also looks like that. And so I was kind of frustrated. So it became a kind of numbers game. And then I kind of persevered. And then I think about after 15 or 20 movies, there was, I can't remember what the second one was, but another one, it was suddenly, that's really interesting. That's very beautiful. That's kind of resonant with the film itself. In some way, that could be a poster for the movie itself. This one off to the right there is Mean Streets. And that's wonderful because it looks a bit kind of mean streety in a way. And I like films that, in their gestalt, somehow are somewhat resonant with the film itself. Like the first Wizard of Oz was, an abstraction of Wizard of Oz. But what I rapidly discovered is directors that kind of hold the camera still for quite a while are good for my technique because they stain the negative. A director like, say, James Cameron, where the camera is constantly moving and doesn't hold any shots at all, the end result is just like a Pantone swatch or something. It's just, my process doesn't get any grip on it. So I spent a long time trying to guess, surely this was Raise the Red Lantern, maybe that'll look interesting. Tarkovsky, he holds his shots for a long time, maybe there'll be something. Actually, Tarkovsky do work really well, actually, for me, because he does hold shots for a long time. The last one we sent off, I think, was to Robert Eggers of The Lighthouse, which lent itself very well. There were quite a few directors. They really liked them. One of the last commissions I had was a producer called Eric Fellner, the Churchill film with Gary Oldman. So that won Darkest Hour, won a BAFTA or an Oscar, or it won something. So the producer of the film telephoned me and asked me if I would photograph that as a present for the director, which I did. I'm always very nervous with that, given the fact that nearly all films look really terrible. So there's always a chance that it's just going to be like a terrible, charmless blur. But luckily, in the case of Darkest Hour, he again was a director that kind of held shots for a while, so it was a very kind of beautiful result. The project started with feature films. I like the idea of feature films and condensing them. And then I thought, well, let's look into other areas. Let's look into proper sporting events. Let's see what an advert looks like. Let's do cartoons, Warner Brothers, Looney Tunes, a Roadrunner cartoon, all 9 minutes of it. What's that like? And it's great, because those Chuck Jones cartoons are very, very beautiful. More recently, I kind of evolved the process, or I wonder if there's anything else in this kind of long exposure, anything else I can think of that's kind of the same but different. I thought I'd go back to sporting events. Muhammad Ali, the Rumble in the Jungle, do you know that? Yeah. I thought, I wonder what that looks like. And I'll shoot it in the same way that I shoot a movie. So I got a kind of Blu-ray of it, got my camera. It's a kind of hour-long fight, photographed the whole fight. Looked at the picture, really uninteresting, just a kind of smudge that wasn't evocative of anything. So I thought, okay, what I'll do is I'll go to the 10th round, the last round, and I'll just photograph that, all 3 minutes of that as a kind of long exposure. So I shot that, then I looked at that. And again, that was kind of like, again, not particularly representative, not in some way anything I was looking at. And then I thought, I know, what I'll do is I'll go for the final punch, the actual knockout punch on the ropes, which is a quarter of a second, just the final punch. And here you get a wonderful intersection between There's the movie footage that everybody knows, and then there are the ringside news photographers that are kind of shooting stills. But here you've got this wonderful kind of hybrid of the two. You've got the kind of dynamism created by motion, long exposure motion, and a kind of similarity to the kind of the still photograph. So it's really interesting. So now I've got a, like, oh, great. I'm going to go to the kind of news archive and try and see any kind of important moments in history. And I'm going to shoot them for the kind of piquant bit of their duration, the relevant bit. I'm going to decide it's this bit that's important, 2 seconds, 12 seconds, whatever. So there, that is the Apollo 11 rocket setting off to the moon. So that's from kind of a YouTube video. It's a 12-second exposure of it. And so then I started this series of kind of history pictures, kind of evolution, same vernacular. It turned out there are very few events in world history, A, that have been filmed, or B, that lend themselves to this particular kind of process. So having thought of every famous world event that's ever been photographed, there has to be a kind of defining moment that is going to be added to by this particular translation, not detracted from. The Will Smith slap at the Oscars, that is great. That lends itself. So that's about a kind of quarter of a second, and you get the whole action of the guy hitting him and his whole body leaning over. And it's great because it introduces this kind of motion. Everyone's seen the stills, but no one's seen it as a smudge. Here you see the time with the slap and his body, and it's different from all the pictures that you've seen in the newspapers, and it's different from when you watch the Oscar footage. It lives in this space in between. And I had in Miami an exhibition of this last year. I call them still motion. People really like them. I think I'm more enthusiastic than a lot of people, because I really think this is like a whole new kind of frontier of photography, going, you know, kind of taking kind of time of important moments, using long exposure from the archive record, from the historical record. It's kind of accidental that they have a painterly quality. They're slightly, you know, the thing about these is they're out of my control in a way. My role here is really often, I feel, kind of as an editor. I kind of go, no, 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 yes, no, 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 no. You know, I select the ones that I think are appropriate. I am, you know. I think it's quite an easy concept to understand. It's nice to be lucky enough to kind of own an idea like this. There's some charming kind of tribute sites where people have done scenes from films. So the diner scene in Reservoir Dogs, people have shot, but some of them are very sweet and go, you know, thanks to, I'm doing this as a nod to Jason Shulman, but instead of doing the whole movie, they just do famous scenes from movies. These were immediately liked, and the internet were very, very popular, and everyone kind of locked onto it as, oh, look at this is a nice. It was just the collective was I was delighted with that. It was a nice feeling. There's a Pasolini film called The Gospel according to St. Matthew, the Gospel, as written in the Bible. It's a beautiful, beautiful movie. And when I shot that, and I took a look at the picture, it was extraordinary, because in the middle of the picture, there was the undeniable face of Jesus Christ, as you would imagine. But the film is just a normal film. It's about Jesus, but there isn't enough Jesus to make up this very strong Jesus character. So how has this happened? It's kind of really bizarre. And so I went back and I watched the movie, and then I realized how it's happened. Because Pasolini, every time he shoots any character, whether it's a child, it's a woman, or it's Jesus, he frames them in exactly the same way in the camera. Dead center, cropped like this. So every character shot is shot like this. And then you cut to an outside shot. But so essentially the kind of amalgamation of all of these kind of heads ended up looking like that kind of Tourin Shroud, you know, the kind of generic human in a way, which oddly, and very Jesus-y. That was very surprising.